Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
On the line with me is Kerry Lutz of the Financial, did I get that right? Financial Survival Network.com. And you can find out about Kerry and all the information he has. You've got, I think, a newsletter and some great books. Been a while since you and I have talked, so welcome back to the podcast, Kerry.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, you know that, and there's so much going on here that none of us can keep track of it, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, so what do you see going on in the financial area, especially that pertains to preppers and the survival of everyday life and stuff? I mean, we've got Obamacare, and we got the economy, and we got the jobs that, don't seem to be increasing. I'm sure none of this is boding well for the economy.
Well, I've been on a lot of different shows lately, Rob, as a guest. My background in the law as an entrepreneur and finally as a radio show talk host, I feel like I've kind of, I wouldn't say a unique perspective because I don't feel like I'm any smarter than anybody else. A lot of people that have much more knowledge about these things than myself, but from a common sense kind of perspective and the ability to take very complex concepts and break them down and simplify them, really, it's obvious that nothing's improved, nothing's getting better. Maybe at best the situation's been static from you, the person on the street. From the standpoint, employment's not gotten better, debt has gotten worse, government's intrusion into your life has certainly gotten worse, government's ability to shape events is slipping, their ability to help you, well, it was never that great in the first place. It certainly is getting worse. And we're getting ready for the next phase. Now, this guy who I put a lot of credence into what he says, what he does, he's an economic historian. And to me, economic history really gives you a lot more insight into things than just plain old history, which is like, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, that really gives you a lot of insight into what's going to happen next. A guy named Bob Hoye, what he says is collapse of central banking is happening. December 23rd, 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve, and the ideology of control, centralized control, is really coming to an end, and the ability to inflate the currency, to maintain control, to inflate credit, that's what's really slipping away. And the bull market of centralized control that really has been in its heyday for the past 100 years, that's what's going away. And, that bull market is ending. And we're going to have a period of chaos ahead of us. Who knows how long it's going to last for, but Bob, who's probably getting up there in his 70s, really believes that what's coming after it really is going to be far better than what came before it. Certainly what's happened in the past 5 years, which really has been a horrible, horrible time period for so many people, for so many of you in so many different ways.
Okay, so let's take a look at the mechanics of that. The central banking is going to collapse, and I would assume that it's because they are playing their last hand. They can't keep inflating, they can't keep printing, they can't keep making money out of thin air and supporting basically Wall Street and bankers. And eventually people are going to, I think they're already starting to see that this isn't working. How do you, or how does Bob see that coming about? What does the end actually look like? I mean, how does central banking crash? What are we looking at as far as currency, the economy? I mean, what is that going to look like?
Well, it's basically, you're seeing it now, really, with first what we've seen recently really is kind of a deflation. And I didn't really notice it myself, I have to admit, till I looked at the year-over-year price of a Thanksgiving dinner. And really, I guess I'm not the kind that goes to the supermarket to buy it. And this year was the first year where I actually bought the stuff myself. And it actually didn't go up much this year. In fact, it went down a little bit. Prior years, it went up, not last year, but prior 2 years, 13%. So we've seen actually a bit of deflation that's taken place in consumer prices. Even though the money supply has gone up, what you've seen here is that that the newly created dollars have just been sterilized. Excess reserves of the too big to fails have been kept on deposit with the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve's been paying them 25 basis points to keep them there. And in the last Federal Open Market Committee minutes, they talked about eliminating that. Once that happens and they no longer get paid to keep their money with the Fed risk-free, interest-free, they're going to have to start loaning that money out. At that point, perhaps you're going to see inflation picking up. In addition, with the exception of a few select real estate markets, I think you're going to start to see the real estate boomlet that you've seen over the past year and a half start to slip away. And there's other factors taking place in the real estate market that you're probably not aware of. For instance, the conventional loan market where you put 20% down and finance 80%, that's going to become the favored market again. So subprime is going to take a hit. And there's all sorts of regulations that this Consumer Financial Protection Board is putting into place to penalize subprime mortgages and to make it harder to resell them in the secondary market, which means the secondary market means Uncle Sam, Fannie, Freddie. They've been buying up all this stuff, and FHA too, for that matter. So unless they stop those regulations from coming in, you're going to see this huge slowdown in real estate purchases by subprime purchasers. And that's going to be a hit in that market. So there's a lot of trends, Rob, taking place here that are going to basically stop the economy, slow it down, and then you're going to see an overreaction, I think, that's going to lead to major inflation. Price of oil has kind of been in a channel for the past year and a half or so, in that $90 to $105, $10 a barrel, and it's kind of stayed there. Is it going to keep staying there? I don't know, but the climate itself, contrary to what the global warmers say, the glow warmers, looks to me like it's getting colder based upon what I see in the Northeast and across the country. The whole country is frozen other than where I am in Florida here. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I know it goes in waves, and this is middle of December. I come from Chicago. I'm familiar with the weather patterns there. My sister was just telling me that, they've got like minus 10, minus 4 degrees right now, which is a little bit early for that type of weather. Typically, it's, snow-producing weather in the 20s and 30s. It seems to be colder there sooner. So, I don't know what the pattern is. It does seem that global warming isn't... See, I don't know. The way I look at global warming, quite honestly, is I view global warming as a precursor to an ice age. Because when I was reading about that back in the day in school and whatever, ice ages are always preceded by a warming trend. And if you remember back in the 70s, they were saying, "Oh, the ice age is coming. The ice age is coming." And then the same guys that grew a little bit older figured out how to make money and said, "Oh, it's global warming." But I think that we're looking at a global cooling trend coming up, and then we're talking decades. So Who knows exactly how cool it'll get and for how long? But that's what I see. So when they show that it's been cooling and stuff, to me that just all makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and look, let's face it. I think it was in the 70s or was it the 80s that Time Magazine had on "Are we headed?" on the cover, "Are we headed for the next ice age?" And then we had we're headed for the next warming period. All right, we've been through that, but the Farmer's Almanac said decreased sunspots, and the people that track weather trends through sunspots say sunspot cycle peaked in 2012. Now it's headed for a very slow period for the next however many years, and you're going to see that temperatures are going to decline. Hey, I'm not the expert in this. All I know is the past few years in the Northeast, the winters have been, at least the past 2 years, really cold and nasty. Last year it was terrible, and this year, though it snows started in November, and they've been really bad, I have to go up there this weekend, and I'm dreading it. They had a snowstorm earlier this week, and they're having one on Saturday, and that's pretty early for New York. So, or maybe it's normal, but the past decade.
Well, I remember a book I read when I was probably in junior high, maybe early high school. It was a book that was talking about the coming trend of climate, and in a nutshell, what this book had said is that the past 50 years, now keep in mind this was a late 70s book, the past 50 years was an abnormal trend, an abnormal cycle. We had mild summers, mild winters, the storms were milder, we didn't have extremes. And we're going to be seeing, as the climate shifts back to a normal period, we're going to be seeing more extremes, hotter hots, colder colds, wetter floods, drier droughts. And that is the norm. When they look at the history of weather and climate for not only this country, but across the hemisphere, they know what normal is. They know what the normal ranges are. And now it's 80 years or so, and we're starting to see the shift. That change has been happening. Climate changes over decades. Weather happens every day. Climate changes over decades. And it's been long enough that we've seen this, and this is exactly what is happening. We're having greater extremes. Higher highs, colder colds. We're having more hurricanes, and those hurricanes, I should take it back, not necessarily more hurricanes, but the hurricanes, when they're stronger, we're getting much stronger hurricanes. When we have floods, they tend to be strong. I mean, look at North Dakota. North Dakota is like a chronic series of flooding, it seems, for the past few years, especially in the fall and the winter. And this is the new norm. This is what people should be getting ready for as far as preppers. Your climate is changing. Here in Arizona, I'm seeing a slight cooling trend. We are having more freeze warnings, more freeze days. In fact, we just had our first few freeze warning days last week, which is, again, incredibly early for us. We used to have no freeze warnings except every once in a while. And then it just every year they're getting more and more. I think 2 years ago we had something like 21 days of freeze warnings, which is quite a lot for this area. And so I think that's the new norm. I think when people move down here, they're going to plant trees. The same thing that we're doing when we replace plants that have frozen and died. We're not replacing them with what they were. We're going to replace them with frost-hardy plants because I think we're going to see a lot more of this.
Yeah, I think it's real hard to predict the weather. I think Yogi Berra had some saying about that, and I'm certainly not the one to do it. I'm sure my record will be as successful predicting the weather as it is predicting the stock market. I mean, let's face it, it's difficult to know, and you track it over thousands of years, and you've seen tremendous variations. The medieval warming period, and the mini ice age, and all sorts of things like that have happened, Rob. So how do you track all this stuff? I don't know. I'm not the one to be discussing about it, but I do know that the whole global warming thing, it's real difficult to know how this stuff shakes out.
Yeah, and that's the thing is hindsight's 2020. And you can always go back and look in history and say, here's the period, this is what happened. Whether it's politics or the rise and fall of a country or a civilization, it's always easier to see in retrospect because you have that benefit of time compression. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before is, we're going through an economic hardship right now. I think that they will probably eventually call this a depression at some point, especially if it gets worse. But you're living through it now. This isn't something that you keep waiting for. A lot of people are having hardship. And I think that it's difficult to prepare for long-term events because they're so long-term. I mean, the economy, I think most preppers, when they look at the economy crashing or the currency collapsing, they're looking at probably less than a year. They're thinking about it in terms of less than a year. Okay, well, when this happens, I'm going to do this. But we've been seeing this, 5 years now?
Yeah, 5 years. Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, there's no end in sight. And it becomes one of those stagnations where you're like, okay, do I continue or what's going to go on or will it stay the same and then get better? Because we get all sorts of different reports, especially in the mainstream press. So, all right, so let's look at 2014. The holiday season is over, 2014. Do you see the collapse of the central banking or the collapse of the economy next year? What do you foresee coming up in the next year? Let's go with that.
Well, I kind of go back to Dwight Eisenhower's priceless quote: "Things are more like they are today than they've ever been before." And that's what it comes down to, is like the normalcy bias. Whatever is happening today seems to be the norm, right? And when you get down to it, it's like, hey, whatever is happening today, that's what should be happening. And whatever happened yesterday, that's what happened then, which is kind of doesn't really help you much. But I think that's a good point, though, is if you only look at how things are today in relation to last week, last month, last year, it doesn't look that bad. Like your typical standard inflation of 2% a year. Oh, that's not that bad. But when you look at it from a longer viewpoint, then it really starts to have an impact because the little numbers start adding up to big numbers. And it's a much greater impact. Yeah, that's kind of what I mean to say. So what looks relatively benign, it starts adding up, and maybe 16 or 17 billion dollar federal debt didn't look like it was that much, but this year maybe the bill comes due, and and the diminution in the standard of living of the average American, all of a sudden it really starts to add up this year, and you don't know what to do, right? And all of a sudden things are like, oh my God, it really hits, because maybe food stamp, look, you heard that food stamp rates, how much you get a year, how much you get per month, you're going to get $20-$30 a month less. It doesn't sound like much. It's $1.50 a day or something that the average food stamp recipient's not going to get. And you say, hey, well, it's $1.50. What does that come out to? That's a cup of coffee, right? So what does that mean, right? Not much. But in the scheme of things, maybe it's a lot. Maybe it makes a difference, right?
Sure. I mean, that's 10 gallons of gas. And if you're on a tight budget, 10 gallons of gas might be a week's worth of commuting to your job.
Yeah. And
which, if you can't go to work because you don't have enough gas, that really significantly starts to impact your personal finances and your personal economy for your family.
Right. So is that the tipping point? I'm not sure, but it could be, like you said, and I'm picking up on your theme. Maybe that's what does it to some people, that pushes them over the edge. I'm reminded of what Gerald Celente said, that when people lose everything, they lose it, right?
Yeah. Well, when you have nothing else to lose, you have nothing to lose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You got nothing to lose, so you might as well go ahead. So, and that's an interesting aspect too. Do you see what's happening like in Greece and in Spain, the riots and the economy strife? We've got tons of people out of work and they're rioting. And you see that coming here? How do you see that playing out here when the central banking fiasco comes to an end?
I don't know. It very well could be, but it all depends what comes next. If what comes next means a total lack of any hope, then yeah, of course, there could very well be riots, and we could see the heavy fist of government come down if there's no hope. Where there's life, there's hope. And I'm not a big hope change person, and I'm not saying that as to be derogatory to the current occupant of the White House. But, if you have no hope, then what do you have, really? Right? Think about it. What do you really have?
Well, hope springs eternal in the human soul. So if you lose hope, then yeah, what do you got to lose? There's not a whole lot left. And I certainly hope we don't go down that way. But I've been pondering the question of, okay, QE cannot continue forever. What does it look like? Right now, I'm thinking that we're looking at a global currency restructuring, because everybody's on a fiat currency. Everybody is going to debt. And at some point, they're going to, I'm guessing, they're going to say, okay, you know what, the dollar doesn't work anymore. We're going to have the new dollar, NU dollar. It's the new dollar, and it's worth 10 to 1, and now you have to go exchange it. And guess what? Instead of having a bail-in this country, which I think is possible, but I think it'd be really bad for them to do. I think a currency restructuring where they just, it's 10 to 1, and everything that you have in investments and banks and retirement account, don't worry, we've automatically switched that over for you. No worry, it's already done. And the cash you have under your mattress, well, you got 30 days to turn it in before you lose it. I'm thinking something like that, because I don't know how else they're going to pull this off. I don't know how they're going to be able to save face without getting themselves, ending up at the end of a rope hanging from a tree, because they've ruined so many people's lives. I don't know. It's very difficult to see what happens, because in this country, people aren't prone to riot. We're not prone. We tend to be passive. Yes, there are some very vocal people, but overall, the American population tends to be a rather passive population. We're not very quick to riot or like we see in a lot of other countries. They're very quick. The wrong politician makes one bad word or pronunciation, and they're rioting the streets over it. We're not like that here. So I don't know. It's hard to say what's going to happen here.
Yeah, well, it all depends if there's enough food to eat. If there's enough food to eat, then people, I guess, will put up with anything. But if there's no food, then who knows? But you do see anecdotal incidences, and it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, we had that, several hour issue with the EBT cards and the SNAP program and all the issues it created.
Yeah, you and I are both following the same things, Rob.
Yeah. Well, but then you were talking about the reduction in the food stamp program. That happened, I think it was November 1st, and I was expecting to see something from that. And either it was never reported and never picked up on, or we didn't really have the issues that, could have come out of it. So, yeah, I don't know. But let's so let's do this. How do you recommend, or what do you recommend to people who are looking forward and saying, yeah, I see this as being one of the bigger problems we're facing? And what do you recommend to them? What do you suggest people and how they can prepare financially or in any other way to get ready for this sort of economic calamity that we see coming?
In a way, that's the easier part because there's always things you can do. It's the rare person that doesn't have some skill, something they can do to raise additional income. Look, even my son, I'll never forget this, Rob. Like, he was basically a senior in high school, and he had always worked. He didn't have to. I was more than happy to give him allowance. He was really a good kid, and I still appreciate the fact that he was, to this day, really good kid. Never got into trouble, knock on wood, and little trouble that he might have gotten into was very, very minor. And basically, he worked in a ski shop. He tuned up bicycles, and just a good kid. And he said, I'm tired of working in the ski shop, tuning up skis and bikes. I've learned everything I can. And they begged him not to leave. He always showed up, always did his work, more productive than any kid in the place. But he said, nah, I need to move on. And he looked on the internet to find out work that he could do. And he was a halfway decent writer, for a kid in high school. And he found that he found a thing called textbroker.com. And he was doing research for people, who were basically outsourcing writing. And he would make anywhere from $8 to $16 per assignment. And he was making about $100 a week some weeks, doing 8 to 12 assignments. And he was rated 3 out of 4 on the scale. Because, like I say, he was a high school kid. And he was doing scientific and medical essays. And they would probably have to rewrite them after he was done. And he never bothered me for any money. And they would put it right into his PayPal account. He transferred it into his bank account. And obviously, if he wanted to work full time, he could have been making $400 or $500 or maybe more per week doing this. And that's just one example of what you can do to make some income. And if you can generate some extra income doing this, you could buy a couple rolls of silver dimes, quarters, pre-1965. So the point is, Rob, you know it and I know it, you can earn extra income even if you don't have the greatest skills on the internet. You got a bunch of junk in your house that you don't need, okay? Go onto the internet and sell it, okay? I had an Apple computer, just upgraded, okay? I bought the thing 2.5 years ago for $1,400, okay? I'm selling it today for about $1,000, okay? I couldn't even believe it was worth that, but that's what the market says it's worth. Get rid of all the junk in your house you don't need. You'd be amazed how much you can get for it. And you probably have collectibles that you don't even know about. Figure out all the stuff you can get rid of in your house that you don't need. Sell it. Pick up some gold and silver. Insurance policy, right?
Yeah, and that's serves a dual function when you're getting rid of your stuff is you're downsizing, which makes you more mobile and more flexible and more able to come up against, suddenly we have to move, or we have to move into a smaller area, but we have all this stuff we have to move ourselves, or B, pay somebody to move and find some place to store it. So when you downsize like that, you make yourself more flexible and you're getting yourself used to doing with less. And I think that's important because in a down economy, you're not going to be able to be materialistic. Well, I suppose if you're rich, you can, but most people aren't going to be able to go out and buy new stuff all the time, new shoes, new clothes. They're going to have to make do with what they have. They're going to have to make do with less, and that's one way to prepare now. I agree. It's a good way to start getting rid of some of the stuff you have, make some money off of it, but take that money. Don't if you need it for bills, of course, pay your bills. But if you don't need it, if that becomes discretionary income, I agree. Buy some gold or silver. Buy some tangible goods, food storage, water filters, camping gear, stuff that you may need in an emergency, in a disaster, in a crisis situation, and make sure you're prepared for that sort of thing. You're talking about your son and getting an internet job. I tell my kids all the time, they are growing up in a time where the opportunity for them to make money, make a career, have fun, whatever, is so much out there, so much greater than it was when I grew up. They can write a blog, they can write a YouTube, and it goes viral, and they can do all sorts of things. There's all sorts of ways to communicate and get jobs that they can do on the side. Now, granted, I mean, they're 12 years old and under, so they're really not, really seriously thinking about this. But I'm trying to keep it into their heads that they don't have to follow the traditional money employment model if they don't want to. If they can find something else to do, then they can be a little more flexible. They could, sell photos, write text, or write blog posts, or write articles, or do research, or any of this stuff. And that's a good advice for somebody who's looking to try to make a little bit extra money on the side and have some free time. There are sites like Fiverr and Textbroker and all these sites. If you start researching and start looking, you're going to find a lot of opportunities. And yeah, you may have to figure out what you're best at, what works best for you. But yeah, I think that's a good advice to be able to have an extra skill that you can turn into, a weekly income.
Yeah. And, it's like, my kids are great. They've really done well. They've got jobs. The only thing I'm disappointed in them and I'm not disappointed in them, don't get me wrong, is that I wish that they were more entrepreneurial that way and they would start their own jobs, but everything in its time. I can't say that I'm disappointed in them. That's not really fair. But, it's the fact is that they could be doing this stuff if they wanted to, but hey, it's what their friends are doing. I'm fourth generation entrepreneur, so that's just the way my mind thinks. And I was hoping that they would be fifth generation, but they have to make their own way. And, that's what worked for me. So I'm not forcing my will upon them by any stretch. So it's what works for them. And I'm not at all disappointed. So, but I think in the new economy, which is what we say on the Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy, entrepreneurialism is what really is going to work for you. And that's what you need to be looking at.
Yeah, I think younger kids, I think they have a better or more of an advantage to be able to address some of this. But if you're an older person who, the internet came later in your life, do some research. Spend some time in front of the computer. Get used to it. Figure out how it works. What can you do on the internet? Start looking at this stuff. And it's not that difficult. It may be different and stuff, but there is so much opportunity out there. For example, my wife, she works for Legacy Foods. She works at home. It's a great job, and she's doing a great at it, and she's having a lot of fun, and she's able to help support the family. But yet still be around to take care of the kids. And it's because of the internet. It's because of this ability to communicate digitally and do so many things on the internet that opens those doors that wouldn't have been there 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's so true. And yeah, my kids, all internet-based work that, forget it. They'd never would have had the opportunity to do that. And, so in a way, they're entrepreneurial, working for other people, and that's something that I can appreciate, and I think is a great thing that they're actually doing. So that is a point that I should look at more favorably than I do, and good point.
So, Kerry, what other suggestions would you have for somebody who's trying to become better prepared financially, a little bit more stable going to 2014?
It's that start new media. There's so many people out there like you and me, Rob, that offer so many options and so many ways of doing things. And, you need to get out of your comfort zone a lot more than you're doing now. And that includes me and you. It's start thinking, start doing, and don't listen to what other people tell you, Don't take anything for granted, and don't assume anything that you're doing is right or wrong. You know what I'm saying? Because it's so much of old thought is really, it's just wrong. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, well, there's a saying I have on the podcast, which for your listeners, I know you're recording this too. For your listeners, they can access it at thepreparednesspodcast.com. But one of the sayings I have in the podcast is do your own research. If you haven't done the research yourself, then you don't truly know what the truth is or what the answer is. And that is for everything, whether it's politics, whether it's food storage, whether it's, how do I make water safe to drink, what's the best knife for me, all that stuff. I mean, you have to do your own research. And yes, it takes time, but you become much more knowledgeable on the truth or what is more correct than a lot of times that's out there, because there's a lot of myth, there's a lot of mystery, there's a lot of bad information out there from people who are just armchair bandits, armchair survivalists, armchair advisors that they don't know because they've never really done it. So even the stuff that I tell my listeners, I'm like, do your own research, don't take my word for it, do your own research, experience this yourself, test it out. If you haven't tested your preps, it doesn't work.
And that's, I've got a question for you based on that exact point that you raised, okay? Because here's the question, and you're going to laugh at it because it may or not be true in your state. Switchblade knives, are they legal in certain states or illegal? What's your answer?
You know what? I don't know. I don't have a switchblade knife, so I haven't really looked into it. All
right.
I figured it was going to be a gun question, which, Arizona is the number 1 state for gun freedoms. So I figured it was going to be, is it really true you can carry concealed without a permit? Yes, you can. As far as
open carry state, Arizona?
We have open carry without a permit. We have concealed carry without a permit, and we have concealed carry with a permit. And you think, well, why do you need both? Well, the CCW permit allows me different perks. For example, I can go and buy a gun, and I don't have to wait for them to do a background check. My background check is done with my CCW permit. But at the same time, my wife doesn't want to go through the hassle of getting a CCW permit. But if the situation arises where I feel she should carry concealed, she could do so, and I don't have to worry about her getting in trouble for doing it. It is the best state as far as gun freedom is concerned. But as far as switchblade knives, you know what? I'm not going to, don't take me to task of this. I'd have to look it up. But I think CCW here in Arizona, it's concealed carry weapon. It's not concealed carry firearm. It's a weapon. So I think that applies to knives as well. But I would have to look that up to be sure. I'm not really sure about switchblades.
Well, the weirdest thing is this. Now, 15 years ago, I bought a switchblade knife in New York. I don't think I have it anymore, but I was able to do it because if you had a fishing license, you could buy a switchblade. And the reason why is because when you're fishing and you pull the fish in, you'll have one hand free and one hand not free. So you needed to be able to push the button to pop the blade open to cut the fish off the line and probably to kill the fish. So somehow, I think it became illegal subsequent to that. But, I think it's illegal now in New York. It's a strange thing, but it used to be legal in New York.
Yeah, I'm looking at a website here. It's weaponlaws.wiki.com/US-switchblade-laws. Now, I haven't vetted this as far as being an authoritative source. However, they got this big table on here, and it is showing that, like in Arizona, it's illegal to carry concealed if you're 21 years old, and it's legal for open carry, legal for sale. But when I drop down to New York, it's illegal all the way across the board. And
it used to be legal. Weird.
Yeah, well, everything used to be legal at some point, right? But so I don't know. Like I said, I don't.
It's legal in Florida, so I'm okay here.
Yeah. So, and this is just again, the internet can be a great resource. However, I would I would look at several places. In fact, you can get access to your state laws right on your state's website. So that'd be one area that I would look into if that's something that you really want to know, is go right to the source, because those laws are typically written and they're available on the website for people to look at. Now, granted, they're written in legalese, so you may have to do a little more research to make sure you're reading it properly. But typically, I don't think it's too difficult to find that stuff out when you really look at it.
Yeah, here it says in New York, it's limited hunting, fishing, and trapping permit required to purchase and possess. In New York, possession is only legal for use while hunting, trapping, or fishing if possessor is carrying a valid state license for hunting, trapping, or fishing. So the other one sounds wrong, but Florida, it says it's legal under State Code 79001, which is a concealed carry weapon. So, yeah. Hey.
What I find interesting here is on this chart, they actually have a column for the balisongs. Those they're not switchblades, but they're those
gravity
click knives, the butterfly knives.
Oh, the butterflies, right?
Yeah, the butterflies, which are very cool. But they're some states apparently consider them the same as a switchblade, which is like, what? I have a pocket knife. I've got a Benchmade.
Sure.
Pocket knife.
Good knife.
And I can open this up with one hand, just kind of a flick of a wrist with that thumb stud that's on there. Mm-hmm. Why is that less dangerous? Actually, this is probably more dangerous than a switchblade, because this has a much better locking mechanism. It's much stronger than a switchblade. A switchblade is actually rather weak at that pivot point. So
it's a switchblade is just a little bit impressive, a little bit intimidating, and isn't really. It's just a James Dean type thing. If you remember Rebel Without a Cause, I think it was.
And that's what a lot of laws are.
Yeah,
it's about flash and perception, and the same thing with the gun laws. They're if your gun is black and military-esque, it's dangerous. But the same cartridge fired out of another rifle, that's perfectly fine. So it doesn't always make sense.
Yeah, well, Arizona, definitely. Firearms are like a religion. A lot the same like in Florida, is a little more restrictive. We don't have open carry, and you are allowed to have a firearm in your car, in the glove box, or you need to have a snap. You can't just have it where you can pull it out unless you have a concealed carry permit. Weird, strange laws in Florida, but that's kind of just the way it is. And nobody quite understands how these laws come into being, but they do. And I guess we have to wrap up now, Rob. So I'm on the financialsurvivalnetwork.com. What's your site again, Rob?
You can find me at, as well as the podcast, at thepreparednesspodcast.com. And Kerry, it was great having you on. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, Rob. You know that. And we're both big fans of preparewise.com. And if you go to my site, you always use the code Lutz. I guess on your site, you've got your own code there, right?
Yeah, actually, I'm not even sure who we have advertising on us now. We changed our advertising model. I'm not doing ads so much on the podcast. We're just keeping it more informative and having ads on the site only. So I'm not even familiar. My wife handles that, so I'm not even sure.
Okay, just use the code Lutz, so I'll get credit for it. We're big. If you go into my pantry, Rob, you'll see 5 huge tubs of PrepareWise Legacy foods. I'm a huge believer. I think I got 720 meals, and it isn't that I started out to have a year's supply. Consolidated 3 houses into one, and that's why I've got them. But I'm a big believer that, and having a lot of water on hand. Survival tools, you can use your imagination, and if you think a switchblade is helpful as a survival tool, by all means have one. One thing I started doing recently, stocking up propane cylinders, because if you need to cook and the electricity's out and that's all you have to cook with, it probably makes sense to have some propane, doesn't it?
Yeah. Now, are you talking about the propane, like the small 1 pound, or are you talking about like the barbecue propane?
Barbecue propane.
Keep in mind with the barbecue, and I just recently realized this. I think it's one of those things I knew, but just completely discounted. Those propane tanks are only good for 12 years. Mm-hmm. So you can't put them in long-term storage because you won't be able to get them filled. Now, it's not terrible. I don't know about in Florida, but here we have these propane tank exchanges. I mean, Walmart and gas stations have them. So you can continuously, cycle them out. And that's one thing to keep in mind is that as soon as that tank is 1 day over its expiration date, they won't fill it anymore. So you need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, very true. I wouldn't recommend. It's not a long-term thing. You got to keep rotating them and using them, just like you would do with other survival things. Like you don't want water laying around for 12 years. You could do it, but you want to keep refreshing the stuff for sure.
Yeah, well, propane's pretty inert. It's one of the better gases to store for fuel because you don't have to worry about degradation like gasoline or something like that. But that's one of the things you have to be careful with because I've got two. You know how the normal tanks are like 20 pounds? I've got a double size. I got a couple double size 40 pound. And my thought was, I'll buy these, I'll fill them up, I'll store them, and I'll have more efficient storage because they're taller and I don't have to fill them up as often.
Right.
But they're only good for 12 years. So the money I invested in those tanks will be for naught in about 8 years from now. Mm-hmm. And even though it doesn't rain a lot here, any sort of moisture on those bare threads causes them to rust. So I'm just like, okay, I think it's easier and better just to go with the 20 pounders because I can rotate those out better. Because they don't check the expiration when you rotate them out, which is good because you can get rid of your old ones or the ones that are busted because they all refurb them anyways. But just you brought it up, so I just thought I'd pass it along.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I'm thinking for continual use, you have 3 or 4 of them. That will get you through several months of cooking if the grid goes out. And these are the things you need to think about.
Now, do you have that just for your barbecue grill?
Yeah, barbecue grill.
Or do you have a cook stove, like a Coleman cook stove?
That's a good idea. I should probably pick one of those up.
You can what I did is I had a dual fuel. It uses automobile gasoline or the white gas. But you can buy a propane generator for it and either run the 1 pound propane, like the Coleman propane tanks, or you can buy a hose attachment and run it directly to the barbecue grill.
Oh, that's cool.
That's far more efficient than running on your grill. Your grill is not really all that. It's a great for flame cooked meat and stuff, but it's not very efficient at all. And you probably triple or quadruple the amount of propane. How long that would last?
I never thought
simply
of that.
By going to a camp stove.
Camp stoves, and they're pretty cheap camp stoves, right?
Yeah, I think you can get a dual fuel for $80 or $100 now, and then you have to buy the propane generator. But I mean, as far as a solution for cooking, it works really well. I mean, because now you have a tri-fuel. You can use store white gas, which stores pretty well for fuel if you want, like camping. Sometimes it's easier to use that. Automobile fuel, you can just siphon out of your car if you had to. Your typical unleaded. Or propane, which, again, if you have all those tanks, you're going to be able to connect it right up to there and use it.
Hey, quick question, because I've had it from listeners before. Generators. What kind of generator do you recommend?
I've got a 5 or a 5,600 watt generator. It's a Coleman, and it runs well, but it is loud.
Noisy son of a gun.
And when you run it now, it's loud. But if there is to be a power outage and nobody has power,
thank God that you have it.
You will think, you could, but also it'll be really quiet. And that generator is like a beacon,
a magnet, like come and get me.
Yeah, this guy's got power. And so I think you need to be careful with generators. For the money spent, you maybe want to look at what you're trying to power and try to go maybe solar, three solar panels and an inverter and stuff. You could probably still run your fridge and your freezer and stuff. But they take fuel. The solar power doesn't. It just uses the sun.
Understood.
I like, if you can get away with the wattage, I like the super quiet ones. The Honda, I think there's one that's made by Robin and Kyoto. I can't remember. But like the Honda, they're lightweight. They're either 1,000 or 2,000 watts. I won't say they're whisper quiet, but you can have a conversation standing over it. They're super, super quiet, and they're much easier to mask that sound. Now, it would still travel in a quiet environment, so it's not like complete stealth, but it's nowhere near as loud as those big generators.
Sure.
So if you can get away with that sort of wattage, I would look at that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, hey, Rob, site again? Yeah,
the site is thepreparednesspodcast.com. And for those looking for Kerry's information, you can go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com, and that's where you'll find all of our information.
All right. And Rob, we'll talk to you again. It's been too long. We will definitely touch base much sooner next time, promise.
Yep,
all right?
Sounds good. Thanks, Kerry.
Hey, good weekend ahead. We'll talk with you soon.
All right, take care.
These are tough times, and they're getting even tougher. The clock is ticking. The countdown to collapse is well underway. What are you going to do about it? Will you just wait for it to happen, or will you be ready when it happens? The decision is yours, and yours alone. Join myself, Mickey Fulp, Robert Ian, David Morgan, Jeff Berwick, Elijah Johnson, Alan Butler, Gregory Manarino, Daniel Amaduri, Andy Hoffman, Tekoa Da Silva, Trace Mayer, one of the world's leading Bitcoin authorities, Bix Weir, Jay Taylor, and Gary Christensen at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium in Las Vegas on February 21st and 22nd, and learn how to create your plan to survive the collapse. The last Liberty Mastermind Symposium was one of the most highly rated conferences ever, and this one promises to be even better. Don't miss it. Join us and register now at libertymastermind.us. libertymastermind.us. This one is going to be out of this world, and it's going to be even better because it's in Las Vegas, Nevada. Go to Liberty Mastermind US and sign up today.
The Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.